Hey guys, what's up? It's Bibsy7 here again, and welcome to my list for the top 5 best bosses in RuneScape 3. This list is obviously just my opinion on the best bosses, and some of your favorites may not have made my list for the top 5, but that doesn't mean I think they're necessarily bad. I just didn't put them on my personal list. This is a new type of video for me though, so any feedback is greatly appreciated, and if you have any ideas for future lists I could do, then please do let me know down in the comments section. Without further ado though, let's get into my list for the top 5 best bosses in RuneScape 3. Coming in at number 5, we have the original Nex fight. Nex is a boss that I have a lot of memories with, as I used to solo her back when Drygores were the best weapons and Torva plate bodies were like 300 mil. It was super fun back then though, learning to solo, as she was pretty much the most difficult solo boss challenge in the game at the time, and it was my first foray into high level PVM during that period. Fast forward to today, of course, the rare item drops aren't really worth as much, but it is still pretty consistent money, and Nex was always so fun due to the depth and variation of the mechanics. Being a boss that came out before the EOC, it was certainly ahead of its time on its release. From the intense DPS race of the blood phase to the panic and near death of being trapped in the ice prison, I'm sure most players have some pretty fond memories of fighting this boss, whether that was solo or with some of your friends. The fact that it still stands up today as one of the most popular bosses definitely ensures that it deserves its spot here at number 5. At number 4, we have Elite Dungeon 2, the Dragonkin Laboratory, and while this isn't technically a singular boss in itself, I think it's fine to just lump it all together here in one spot on this list as like a total encounter or experience. The second dungeon brought with it many improvements over the first that made it far more enjoyable to run through in my opinion. Having to kill mostly low amounts of high health monsters to progress is more fun than the mass amounts of low health monsters in Elite Dungeon 1. And although this does exist in the slimes and golems in Elite Dungeon 2, it's far less frequent, and the ability to pop off a detonator tsunami on those rare big groups that do pop up actually makes for more fun and varied combat throughout the dungeon, which I approve of. Similarly, you don't really have the ability to just run by a majority of the monsters in Elite Dungeon 2 despite them being on the critical path of the dungeon, like you can in Elite Dungeon 1. This dungeon is actually the most recent boss or PVM encounter to be released into the game, and with Elite Dungeon 3 looming on the horizon early next year, I really can't wait to see what further improvements are made to the formula and what new additions they make. So really looking forward to that release. It is a bit hard to quantify what exactly I like about the dungeon or the encounters, but there's just something about running through the large area, killing the mobs, and potentially some of the mini-bosses to reach the overall section's boss while accumulating loot relics along the way that just makes it to be a ton of fun in my opinion. This dungeon also mixes in the chance to get a valuable codex from any one of the bosses, so that's a bit of an improvement of the first dungeon because it was obviously a bit boring killing the early bosses as there was no real big drop you could get, but this dungeon added those codexes to ameliorate that issue. And you also obviously have that chance at the end to get a massive amount of energies for a great profit if you get lucky. In all honesty though, the bosses themselves aren't super exciting or memorable in this Elite Dungeon compared to other bosses, but I mainly have it here on my list for the whole experience or encounter rather than each boss within the dungeon individually, so I decided to put it here at number 4. For number 3, I have chosen one of the first bosses to be released after the EOC and easily one of the most epic fights the game has ever seen, and that is Virago. Following up on the admittedly lackluster first boss of the EOC, which was the Calphite King, Virago was a true demonstration of what the EOC could do and what players could do with these big changes to combat. And this really justified the shift of the combat system for many of the players who had stuck around in the aftermath. There's really no other word for the Virago fight than epic. You're battling in a massive cave that he slowly destroys the floor of, grappling with him to remove weapon pieces from his own body that you assemble to ultimately defeat him with. And this is all capped off by an intense tug-of-war mechanic at the end, requiring the players to make one final push to finish off the fight. Virago is one of the few bosses on this list actually that I took on its actual release date, and the formation of strategies and ideas flying around while players got closer and closer to completing that first kill was amazing to be a small part of. Virago also established what soon became a standard among high-level bosses of being unable to teleport out, which I think was something that was certainly needed to avoid making things like risk-free without making them ridiculously hard or littered with many insta-kill mechanics. This inability to teleport out kind of struck a good balance in that issue. In its time, though, Virago's weapons were far above max cash, and the few who could kill him made massive profits as a result. Unfortunately, I was never among those people who were killing Virago in its heyday. I only really got into killing Virago later on, when all of the strategies were generally established and new gear was released, making it a bit easier. Virago also introduced the rotational boss mechanic system, which is now present at a few other bosses. While there are some definite pros and cons to the system overall, I think it works pretty well at Virago itself just due to the nature of the fight, as it allows for big changes in some mechanics between the weeks, while the overall fight generally stays pretty much the same. In addition to this, Virago comes with a hard mode version, bundling all of the rotational weeks into one big, long fight. Many of the mechanics are also made more dangerous as a result, and that makes this challenge only accessible to those who have truly mastered the original standard fight. And I feel like this is something that new hard mode boss versions tend to lack, as they just add entirely new mechanics a lot of the time, so it doesn't really depend on your mastery of the normal mode of the boss to do well in the hard mode. It's something I think they definitely should focus on if they're adding hard mode to future bosses, is making sure it just makes the original fight harder without needing to add too many new mechanics necessarily. So I think that's something they did really well with Virago's hard mode. And while Virago's big drops are no longer the massive price that they used to be, there's still great money to be made from the energy drops that continue to maintain a high price, since they're the components for the best magic armor in the game. Virago is also an extremely fun challenge to take on in a duo or a smaller team, with you and a partner working together to take him down. I'd say it's easily the most fun duo challenge currently in the game if you're up to the task. Overall, though, the Virago fight is fantastic. Despite some of the less desirable time-gating mechanics, I would still say it easily deserves a spot on this list as one of the best bosses in RS3. Number 2 is a boss that not a lot of people really continue to kill nowadays, although I would personally say it's my favorite group boss in the game, and that is Barrow's Rise of the Six. The Rots fight is so fun because it's typically really short compared to most other group bosses, but at the same time it's really hectic and you can easily die if you don't pay attention or you don't know what you're doing. One of the most interesting things about this is that in the typical fight, you'll really not see even close to all the mechanics that each one of the Barrows brothers actually possesses. However, it's still important that you're aware of what all the mechanics are and how to deal with them so you can appropriately adjust if they happen to come up in a fight. On top of this, it's a very unique group boss where it's essentially two duo teams working mostly on their own to take down their respective brothers to finish off the fight, and there's really basically no interaction between the two teams at all. Additionally, though, as part of the fight being with multiple enemies at once and being so short, the strategies are quite different from most other bosses, which makes killing Rise of the Six kind of like a refreshing change of pace when compared to your average PVM. People will often use range in order to capitalize on mech chinchampas, and it's usually never really useful to use these standard damage boosting ultimates like Sunshine during the normal fight, which is definitely not the case at most other bosses. As far as the loot goes, there was never anything super exciting from Rise of the Six, though the shields were worth a decent amount when it first came out. They're now basically worthless for the most part. However, the energies still maintain a pretty decent value, and consistent teams can make pretty good money here on average, and it's definitely not too bad if you are able to get the kills every time. Another interesting thing about the fight is having to escape the tunnels afterwards. This is something many people actually dislike about the fight overall, but I think it's an interesting and sometimes scary addition to make it out during those last few seconds when the caves start to explode. So I don't think it's the best mechanic, but it's not too bad in my opinion. It doesn't really take away from the actual fight being so exciting as a whole. It can also be fun to do rots with 2 or 3 people as a challenge, but unfortunately you don't get any more loot as a result, so it's not really worth doing unless they update it in the future to always output 4 drops regardless of the player count in the fight, which I think they definitely should do to give some incentive to allow people to do the smaller team fights rather than just saying they can do it. The main weak point of the boss overall, though, I would have to say is the pet mechanic, or the fact that there's basically no pet drop. You simply buy energies and make the pets out of those, which is pretty lame, but it's not a huge issue, and it doesn't really have to do with the actual boss itself. However, the unique nature of the fight, including the fun and fast-paced mechanics, are what earns it the spot as number 2 on my list. I'm sure you all probably know what my number 1 best boss is going to be, and that is Telos the Warden. Telos is easily my favorite boss, and nothing else even comes close. The fight is so much fun to learn with the many, many different mechanics involved, how to deal with them, and the best approach to each situation. Slowly learning how to do entire kills without food after running out so much earlier on when you first started is a great feeling of your improvement at the boss. Despite it being a fixed fight with very predictable mechanics mostly, things can vary wildly from fight to fight, testing your skill at navigating the challenging situations that are thrown your way, whether it'll be from some bad luck or maybe some small mistakes that you made on your part. Telos has a fantastically made enrage system, which allows even the most PVM-averse players to score a kill at the lowest enrage, as it is pretty easy. But as his enrage increases, new mechanics are added to the fight, requiring you to change your strategies or modify your approach to fit these new situations. This extends all the way up to past 1000% enrage, where Telos becomes one of, if not the hardest PVM challenge in the game, as his attacks become extremely punishing and unforgiving. All of this, the fight, the mechanics, and the enrage all together, honestly may not make for my favorite boss in the game on their own, but the very best part about Telos, and what pushes it straight to the top of my list without a question, is the streaking mechanic. There is nothing more intense in the game than losing your sign of life when you have over 100 mil in loot and possibly some unique items in the chest. Instant panic will set in, but you'll simultaneously know that you need to recover the situation and complete the kill to save your loot. It's really like a test of your mettle and your ability at the boss if you end up in one of those scary situations. The streaking mechanic is magnificently made, slowly increasing Telos' enrage as you build up your loot, giving you more and better drops as you push higher, and it gives you a better chance at unique items as well. It puts your skills to the test, challenging you to be consistent at scoring those kills as the fight gets more and more difficult with each click of that continue challenge button. Seeing that unique item show up and having the confidence to keep on pushing, knowing you can go higher, do more, and maintain your improved drop rate for more kills is truly a feeling like no other in the game. On top of the amazingness of the fight and its looting mechanics, the drops are extremely lucrative as well. While not as amazing as they were about a year ago when I camped the boss to the max, you can still make magnitudes more money consistently streaking at Telos than you can anywhere else in the game, no question. Assembling a set of 3 of the orbs will net you somewhere around 800 mil in profit currently, I believe, and while this used to be around 1.4 bill, it's still a massive amount. You could also get lucky and get a one-off drop of somewhere between 200 to 500 mil-ish for the Dormant Staff of Sliske or the Reprisal Ability Codex. Telos is easily the best boss in the game, in my opinion, and while new bosses are a fun challenge and enjoyable for a while, I always end up back at Telos, and I don't see them topping it anytime soon. And that's why Telos is my number 1 best boss in RuneScape 3. That is going to wrap up this top 5 video. Please leave your feedback in the comments down below. This is the first time I'm doing a video similar to this, so I'm interested to see your thoughts on it. And if you have any ideas for future lists I can do, leave them in the comments down below. I can obviously do a top 5 worst bosses list, which I'll probably be doing regardless, but definitely let me know if you have any ideas of your own in the comments. Also, you can post your top 5 favorite bosses in the game in the comments as well. Let me know your thoughts. I'd like to see how the lists kind of vary between people down there. And yeah, overall I think that the bosses in the game are really fun, and you might have noticed a surprising absence of a few bosses that you might have expected that are higher levels, like maybe Solok or Araxor. But for Araxor, I really don't like the way it works in that you need to do each path to get the spider leg, but it's also on a rotation, so you can't do the path you necessarily need whenever you want to do it. So I'm not sure how they could change it without making the boss completely different or too easy even, but I definitely don't like the way they implemented that. And then for Solok, honestly, I just get a bit bored at Solok. It's not the most exciting fight overall, as there's a lot of just kind of waiting around, but just like mindless DPSing really for the most part. That's, in my opinion, not super enjoyable. They just gave it a massive health pool just to do it, and the mechanics themselves aren't too interesting, so that's why those aren't up there. Raids, I would say maybe would be on this list if I ever went with teams that weren't complete morons, but again, I don't really like the size of the teams at raids. 10 people just seems too large for this game in general, so I don't think it works out too well even with experienced players, so that's why that's not on this list. If you were wondering why any other bosses aren't on the list that you might have thought of, maybe like Next Angel of Death, again, kind of a boring fight if you ask me, similarly to Solok, but a bit more exciting for sure. But you can ask me any questions you might have in the comments down below, and yeah, I'll probably be doing a top 5 worst bosses in the near future. If you guys are interested in that, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.